Welcome to Bottles and Bites Without Borders, where every sip and every bite tell a story. Rob is your host. Each week, he will take you on a delicious journey, from vineyard tales and distillery secrets to culinary traditions. So, grab a favorite drink, a plate of something tasty, and join us for another adventure with Bottles and Bites.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming by for another episode. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it if you're a returning listener. That means a lot. And if you're a first-time listener, thanks for finding the show. Hopefully you enjoy it and you'll come back for another episode. And by the way, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. That means a lot to us. And if you could, leave a like and a review wherever you listen at whether it's Google or Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever it is. You know, that really helps us with the algorithm for other people finding the show, and it means a lot. All right, let's dive into tonight's episode. We are talking bourbon. We're back to the brown juice. Bourbon is something that I've been into for about 10 years, and I think I'm typical. I think I've taken, a journey, and, I don't know where the journey ends, but I'm at a point in my journey where I have some opinions, and I'm going to share those with you tonight. So that could be a little, we'll see what people think about my opinions. I know what my wife thinks about it, not a lot, but she's not here right now. It's just me tonight is who you have. And what we're talking is bourbon royalty while legacy distilleries still reign supreme. And, to me, I think that, you heard me mention a minute ago, this journey of, getting into bourbon, finding certain things, hunting as we call it, being a tater. We've all been a tater. We're all still taters. And if you're in the bourbon world at all, if you consume and look and have a little collection, you know what a tater is. I'm not going to get into all that. But this episode is going to kind of talk about why I don't even want to give it away yet. You're going to hear my comments and see, but I think it's a little bit of a hot take. I think, some folks listening might think it's bourbon heresy for me to say some of the things I'm going to say. But I'm going to say them anyway, and let's get started. So what I've done, when I say, bourbon royalty, when I say legacy distilleries, I've identified, for me, 7 of them. I call them the big 7. And I'm going to give you just kind of a brief kind of styles and notes on each one of these and who they are. We're going to go through that part of it first. So let's start with the first one on my list, and these are in no particular order. I just kind of wrote them down as I was, trying to think of who I would put in this category. And the first one that I've listed in this category, and I don't think there would be any question if you're in the bourbon world at all that this is a legacy distillery, and that's Wild Turkey. Wild Turkey is fantastic. They have a great portfolio. They have a high rye mash bill. They have 2 mash bills. One is their high rye mash bill for the bourbon. Then they have a rye mash bill. A little bit bold, a little bit spicy, but just a great portfolio. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in just a bit. So they're number 1 on my list. They're in the 1 position. I wouldn't say they're number 1, although they might be. Old Forester coming in at number 2. They are a definite legacy distillery. I mean, when you think about the bottled and bond that came to be, they've been around a long time and a big part of that, So historic distillery, when you think about them, you think about those banana notes that you get on Old Forester, things like that. I do have some friends that are not a fan, and I do want to say that. I'm listing you 7 what I think are legacy distilleries. I'm not telling you I'm madly in love with every bourbon all of these places make, but I do think they fall in that category of being a legacy distillery. And that's the beauty of anything, right? Food, wine, whiskey, coffee. You're not going to like everything that's put in front of you. I actually had a friend of mine, a winemaker, say that. If I pour you, he said, if you're coming to visit me and I pour you some wines, and every wine I pour you and you taste and you say you love it, he said, eventually I'm going to call you a liar because you're just not going to like everything that a producer makes. And distilleries are the same way. And I would also say distilleries kind of have this profile about them that people either like or don't like. But for the most part, I think, bourbons are, I don't want to say, I will say, they're similar, right? They're in this lane. We think vanilla, we think spice, we think cherry. They have these kind of descriptors that everybody might say, and nobody would really call you wrong. But there's some undertones, some underlying, characteristics to these distilleries that make them unique. So anyway, just wanted to get that out of the way. So number 2 was Old Forester. Number 3 is my only distillery that's not in Kentucky, and this is in Tennessee. Yeah, you guessed it, Jack Daniel's. That charcoal mellowing. I think they have a very underappreciated portfolio because I think there's a lot of depth there with them. I think they do some fantastic bourbons, and I think, you need to explore them a little bit more than what you just think of them. I think a lot of people just think old number 7, and that's Jack Daniel's. Now, if you're a bourbon person, you probably know that there's a whole lot more, and you're starting to see more and more of it on the shelf at a regular, kind of pace. They're always there. Number 4 on my list is Four Roses. Now, Four Roses is fantastic. I mean, when you talk about what they offer, they have high complexity. They have ranges from spice to herb to sweetness. They do all kinds of cool things, and we're going to get into that in just a minute as we talk a little bit further about these brands. Number 5 for me is what I would call the workhorse. I mean, to me, this distillery is up early, stays late, hands are dirty, boots are muddy, muddy, muddy. That's Jim Beam. I mean, I think their products are amazing. There's a huge portfolio for them, and I think as I talk about some of the brands here in a minute that are under Jim Beam, some people might be surprised and go, I didn't even know that was a Jim Beam product. Because I'll tell you, as I got into bourbon and learned more about, the different offerings and who they belong to, that was a uh-oh moment for me, or a aha moment, I guess I should say. I didn't know that. That's a Jim Beam product. It sure is. One thing that I always thought was unique about Jim Beam is that they have that kind of peanut funk on their products. You kind of get that peanut funk to it. It's a dead giveaway for a lot of people who do blinds, and there's a Jim Beam product in there. Number 6 for me on my list is Heaven Hill. Heaven Hill has been around quite a long time. They actually have a lot of brands within the Heaven Hill portfolio, kind of similar to what we're going to talk about with Jim Beam. Elijah Craig, I would say, is their biggest value bourbon that's high quality, 94 proof for about $30. But they have some other brands as well. And some of these distilleries have some brands that I haven't even tried. Not that I wouldn't, I just haven't. There's so many, you drink so many, you find what you like, you get 2 or 3 or 4 from a distillery, and it's kind of hard to go through everything that they make. The last one on my list, rounding out my big 7, is Maker's Mark. And this is the only distillery on my list that makes 100% wheated bourbons, meaning wheat being the second grain behind the corn versus what typically is a rye. That would usually be the second grain. So anytime we know it's a wheated bourbon, that's what we say. Otherwise, you just say bourbon and the second grain is rye. Here, Maker's Mark. For the longest time, we're going to get into this in a minute, only did one product or one kind of profile of a product. But over the last, I'd say 8 to 10 years, they've really kind of started to build a portfolio. So I'd still say they're in that process of developing new things, coming up with new things, and it's pretty cool. And they're getting creative and doing some fun things. So that's our big 7. That's the 7 distilleries that I think are legacy distilleries that you should be drinking bourbon from. This should be your go-to distilleries. And some of you might be going, hold on a second, Rob. I thought you're a bourbon guy. And, you didn't mention somebody that should absolutely be on this list. And you're probably talking about Buffalo Trace. And I didn't put them on here for a specific reason. I wish I could put them on here, but part of the criteria for making my Big Seven was that you have to have product that's readily available. That if I go to the shelf, I can find 5 different offerings from every one of these distilleries, no problem at all, with the exception of Four Roses, but that's changing, and we'll get into that in a minute. They're still on my list, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So Buffalo Trace did not make my list because, unfortunately, you cannot find their products. Even here in Texas, and we're blessed to get great distribution of some great bourbons. We are able to get, the Weller Special Reserve, the green label, always on the shelf, and the Buffalo Trace Bourbon, the 90 proofer, always on the shelf. But we're the exception, not the rule. You don't see those everywhere. I know a lot of folks around the country who never see those bourbons and would go crazy to get those bourbons. Now, we do periodically run into and get lucky and can find whether it's a Antique 107 or a Weller 12, or you might run into a small batch from E.H. Taylor. No doubt about it. It's a once in a while kind of thing, and you're happy to snag those up when you see them. But for my list, one of the big criteria was the product had to be on the shelf where consumers could just say, I want a bottle of it, and go out and get it. That's not to say there's some products from the distilleries I listed that are, these allocated bottles. They have these special releases, no doubt about it. All of them do. Again, Buffalo Trace's, everything in their portfolio falls in that category. So it's not on the shelf. I can't go get a Blanton's or a straight from the barrel Blanton's or a gold Blanton's anytime I want. So, or just a Blanton's for that matter, or just a Weller 12 for that matter. So that's why Buffalo Trace did not make my Big Seven. So what I want to do now is just kind of talk about these brands and how they represent, to me, the full range of bourbon styles that anybody who drinks bourbon would want, right? From sweet to spicy to oaky, heavy oak, to things that are, kind of delicate and elegant, and why you don't really need to look anywhere else to find bourbons. And you really don't. So let's start with Wild Turkey. Wild Turkey has deep historical roots. They go back to 1869. It's a long lineage. And that's when the Rippey brothers opened a distillery on Wild Turkey Hill in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. Now, the Wild Turkey brand name wasn't coined until sometime in the 1940s. I think it was after an executive, I think the story goes that an executive from Wild Turkey took some samples on a turkey hunting trip with some friends and kept asking them, and the friends kept asking for more of that Wild Turkey whiskey. And then that's kind of how the name came to be, which is really a cool story. It really is. And then when we think about Wild Turkey, if you know them at all, you've got to think the Russell family and the impact they've had on this distillery. Jimmy Russell, still there today, has been the master distiller since 1954. He's been the master distiller for way more than a decade than I've been alive. That is just crazy to me. He is one of the longest serving distillers in the industry. I don't know who would be, anywhere longer than him. And then, that tradition is just kind of being passed down. His son, Eddie Russell, now a master distiller as well. He joined in 1981. The father and son team, they have some continuity. They have some traditional approaches. They also have some disagreements on how things should do or be made. And, they work it out. And the result is we are continuing to get some great product. So like I said earlier, Wild Turkey has a high rye bourbon mash bill. They go in at a lower barrel entry proof of about 107 to 115. They never, I don't want to say, they never chill filter Wild Turkey 101. They do chill filter some other stuff. They say they don't chill filter Rare Breed, but you can get a version of it that's not chill filtered. That's why I don't want to say never. They use heavy char barrels, which are known as, the number 4 alligator char. It gives them this distinctive, bold, and spicy kind of profile. And man, they've been a cultural and industry influence in bourbon for a very long time. I mean, they helped define the modern American whiskey palate. And, I think there are two, if you had to ask what their 2 signature bourbons are, I mean, their signature is Wild Turkey 101, but I think Rare Breed is also, what I would consider a signature bourbon. All right, let's move to our second bourbon. Okay, I would say Old Forester, they're considered a legacy distillery for a few reasons. I think, one, it's the reasons are definitely rooted in history, in innovation, and in continuous operation. They've been around a very long time. They first bottled bourbon back in 1870. Old Forester was the first bourbon sold exclusively in sealed bottles. And, there's a reason for this. I won't get into it on this show. It might be fun for another show. It was a safety concern for consuming the product that was in these bottles. It gave the consumer some assurance that it hadn't been tampered with. And you also had some quality issue that, you knew it was actually bourbon. Go figure, right? What else would it be? You'd be surprised. Old Forester was introduced by George Gavin Brown in 1870. At the time, most whiskeys were sold in barrels, not even in bottles. So when they started bottling bourbon and doing it that way, it ensured quality and it ensured consistency. The innovation laid the foundation for consumer trust and modern branding in American whiskey. Now, Old Forester, they had continuous production through the Prohibition period. From 1920 to 1933, Old Forester was one of only 6 distilleries granted a federal license to produce medicinal whiskey. Who would have thought? Whiskey's medicine, right? Who would have thought? This allowed them to maintain uninterrupted production, a rare distinction that adds to its legacy status. So, very cool. Another thing that's really cool about Old Forester is it is produced by Brown-Forman, which is still one of the largest American-owned spirits and wine companies, and it remains the only bourbon brand continually owned and marketed by the founding family before, during, and after Prohibition, which to me is just so cool. I mean, it reinforces the authentic kind of history, the lineage of this product. So very, very cool. A lot of reasons to, get into Old Forester. They make some cool stuff. They have their Whiskey Row series. They have birthday bourbon. They have their, the Statesman's Expression. They have their 100 proof. They have a bottled and bond. So they have some cool stuff. They really. And like most of these big distillery, they're continuing to contribute to the evolution of bourbon, new products coming out, bourbon's identity. So Old Forester, definitely one that needs to be thought of when we think of the Big 7. So next on my list is Jack Daniel's. And Jack Daniel's definitely should be considered a legacy distillery. I mean, it embodies a lot of the characteristics that I think you would think of when you think of the word legacy. They have that longevity. They have influence. They have cultural significance. And they've really had a commitment to tradition. They really have. Interesting note about Jack Daniel's. Where they're produced, in the county they're produced in Tennessee, go figure, it's a dry county. You can't drink in that county. Yet there's this major distillery that's producing bourbon there, but you can't drink in that county. Just fun fact in case you didn't know that. But let's talk about Jack Daniel's. They've been around a very long time, since 1866, and you're seeing a trend here. When I say legacy distilleries, these bourbon royalty, look at the time periods. All of these have went back to the 1800s. So Jack Daniel's, 1866. is when it was officially recognized. So it's been around a very long time. It's had continuous operation through centuries of American history, including Prohibition. It was actually technically shut down, but it did retain its licensing and its legacy status. So it's definitely cemented in the place of whiskey heritage. There's always this, if you don't know it, and most of you, if you're listening to this, are into bourbon, you know this. Always that question: is it bourbon? Because Tennessee people will tell you it's Tennessee whiskey. It's not bourbon. I'm here as the authority on the topic. It's bourbon. Come on, it's bourbon. I get it. It's a marketing thing. It's different. Whatever. It's bourbon, and it's a great bourbon. They make some fantastic products. They have actually, done a really good job of growing their portfolio. They've been a cultural icon. Jack Daniel's has become synonymous with American whiskey. Especially again when you say Tennessee whiskey, right? Black Label, Old Number 7. This is a global symbol. I mean, everybody around the globe has probably seen or drank, or at least seen it in movies or in pop culture. Something. It's very well known, and in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and in Southern culture at large. I mean, this is their identity. This is the home of Jack Daniel's. So this is something they're very proud of, and they should be. And they have a huge influence on whiskey making. Jack Daniel's helped define Tennessee whiskey through its use of the Lincoln County process, that charcoal mellowing before aging. It influenced American whiskey standards and became a touchstone for quality and brand consistency. So definitely deserving of being that legacy distillery. Let's move on to our next one. All right, next on our list, one of my favorite distilleries, Four Roses. And this is a legacy distillery. Again, you heard me mention the 1800s. This distillery has been around since 1888. Fun story. Need to go check it out. I'm not going to bore you with it now about how it got its name. I think there's a little bit of maybe controversy or different stories. You can decide which one's true. You can decide which one you like better. But a couple fun stories on the name Four Roses. Because if you hear that for a bourbon, you might be going, why Four Roses? Go read the story. Pretty cool. So it did, Four Roses, it survived Prohibition by being one of the few distilleries, again, granted that license to produce that medicine whiskey, right? I call it medicine whiskey. Kept the brand alive, during the Prohibition years of the 20s, the 1920s to the early 1930s. Even in the 1940s and 50s, Four Roses, believe it or not, was the best-selling bourbon in the United States, which, at that point in time, I mean, that's a pretty massive accomplishment. And to me, I mean, it kind of cemented its place in whiskey history, if you will, when it accomplished that. Now, if anybody knows the story of bourbon and kind of, the ups and downs it's had as a spirit, there was a time in the 20th century where bourbon fell out of favor with the U.S. consumer. And in that mid-20th century, Four Roses remained popular in international markets, particularly in Japan and Europe. And I would say also, Wild Turkey and Four Roses are the two that I think of that survived and really, had success because of the Japanese and the European markets that really kept them going. Four Roses was actually owned by Seagram's for decades. When you think about Seagram 7, that old 7 and 7, right? And during this time, the U.S. market only got Four Roses blended whiskey. So nothing that was quality or anything good. Everything else that was, a high quality bourbon, it went overseas. That kind of changed in 2002 when Karen bought the distillery and they reintroduced Four Roses bourbon to the American market, sparking a revival and earning it newfound respect among us whiskey lovers. And there was a couple of reasons for that. And one of which was Jim Rutledge. I mean, he was the master distiller at Four Roses at the time. And man, he just really did a good job with that, for sure. The other reason was Al Young. Al Young was the ambassador for Four Roses for more than 50 years. And here in our community in Houston, the bourbon community here, had a number of times where Al, came to visit and would have a drink with people and tell stories and promote Four Roses, but also promote bourbon. And I think, him doing what he did really was a huge part of the comeback in the United States from 2002 until now with the popularity, the growth, the love of Four Roses bourbon. Al Young was a big part of that. Same with Jim Rutledge. Four Roses had this very innovative approach to making bourbon. I really love what they do. They have 2 mash bills, right? 2 recipes. One's a 35% rye, very, very high rye. One's a 20% high rye. And then they have 5 proprietary yeast strains. And with the 2 mash bills and these 5 yeast strains, they can make 10 distinct, different bourbon recipes. And then, when you think about blending and coming up with some cool stuff, it really gives them a lot of flexibility there, but also some consistency. So it's a really cool product in the way they do it. Now Brent Elliott is the master distiller. He actually worked for a period of time under the tutelage of Jim Rutledge, but I give Brent a lot of credit because he's come out and made his own name. As much as he's kept some things the way they were, what they were doing and things like that, he's really made his own name for the brand on what he's doing and how he's doing it. Now, I do want to talk about, if you're a Four Roses, or say you're not into Four Roses, let's say it this way, and you go to the bourbon store, whatever it might be, a liquor store, a store that has, a bunch of bourbon, and you're looking on the shelf and you go, Rob, all I see is, this 80 proof yellow label. I see a small batch select, and a single barrel. That's all I ever see. And you would be right. But as you heard me just talk about these 10 distinct bourbon recipes, this is where it gets fun. If you pick barrels for Four Roses, you're going to get a barrel-proofed product, right? 1 barrel, and it's going to be one of these distinct bourbons. And that's where it's become very, very popular, is finding these different picks. And it's almost like if you think about Blanton's, when people go around trying to collect all the different bottles to get the different letters on the horsies to be able to spell Blanton's, same thing can be said for Four Roses. A lot of folks will go around trying to buy different picks to collect all bottles that represent all 10 recipes. And that's been tough. And I say been because Four Roses is doing something really cool. They have started the first part of the release program of all 10 recipes. And I believe it's now K is what they're releasing. So I won't get into all the recipes. We did do an episode on Four Roses explaining that. So OESF, OBSF, OESK, and OBSK. I believe those are the 4 bourbons that are released now, those 4 recipes. But over a period of time, and I'm not sure what that time is, all 10 recipes will be out. So you're going to see these new cool bottles on the shelf. They kind of have this kind of maroon red label. So it's a little bit different than that kind of lighter gold label that you typically see on Four Roses. And it'll have the recipe around the neck of the bottle up towards the cork there, which is really cool. So I'm really glad they're doing this because I have friends and know people who have been in bourbon but have not gotten into Four Roses because they didn't think there was much there. But once you explain to them about these 10 different recipes, they get a little stoked and they start to go, wait a second, hold on. Maybe I ought to be exploring this a little bit more. And they should be. So I encourage them to find or try to find store picks. But the good news is now those should be hitting shelves. These are we're being told to be shelf items. They're not going to be, once a year release like an allocated item. These should be offerings that are on the shelf. So that's really cool. I would say the other cool thing about, what Four Roses is doing is they're adding 2 more mash bills to their lineup. So when you think about 4 mash bills, 5 proprietary yeast strains, now you've got 20 recipes. So potentially in the future, these haven't been, nothing come out yet that I know of. I'm sure they've probably been doing this for a while, and they're starting to release this information because barrels have come of age, if you will, where they might be able to start releasing these in the next, year, 2 years, something like that. But word is out that there's going to be a total of 20 different recipes, which is really kind of cool and kind of fun. All right, let's move on to our next distillery. All right, next up for us is Jim Beam. And when you want to talk old, I mean, you heard me going, talking with this level of impressiveness when I talked about the age of all the other distilleries, 1860, 1888, 1869. When we talk about Jim Beam, we're talking about it being founded by Jacob Beam, 1795. So we're talking about a distillery that has been producing bourbon for over 225 years, easily making it, I would say, the oldest. I don't know if it is the oldest, but I would have to think it's the oldest American distillery that's still in operation, is still making juice today. The Beam family, has maintained a multi-generational legacy. 7 generations have been involved in the brand's, stewardship and whiskey making tradition. I mean, it's really just been this and Wild Turkey to me would be the two that the biggest impact on the American spirit that is bourbon. I mean, they had some great resilience through Prohibition. Like many distilleries, Jim Beam had to shut down for a period of time, but they came roaring back. In 1935, just a couple years after Prohibition, James Beam, the namesake, Jim Beam, rebuilt the distillery in just 120 days and relaunched the brand. I mean, that really cemented them, as one of the legacy distilleries in bourbon. They've got some of the world's best-selling bourbons. Now, when you think Jim Beam, to me, it's not one that you think a ton of what we call allocated bottles, but they do have a few. But they are, to me, the absolute best at value, quality, and volume, meaning their quality to price ratio on almost all their product is fantastic, but the volume of products they offer is amazing. I mean, it really is. It's massive. It's the world's best-selling bourbon. It's available in over 100 countries. Their iconic white ship, their iconic flagship is their white label bourbon. I mean, it's very, very popular. It's like, old number 7 from Jack Daniels. It's always behind the bar. But I got to tell you, if you've never had it, it's consistent. It's really good quality. It's affordable. Again, it's a really good bourbon. And so they've really been an innovator in the bourbon community. They've done the small batch collection with Baker's and Booker's and Basil Hayden, Knob Creek, all of these, Baker's 7, all of these, if you didn't know it, are Jim Beam products. So a lot of people go, Knob Creek, that's a Jim Beam product. Yep. Baker's, Basil Hayden. Yep. All Jim Beam products. So all the different Basil Haydens you see are all part of this distillery. So pretty cool. It really is. They do a great job. So I would say, they predate most other bourbon brands. They've survived wars, prohibition, the global economic changes, and they've helped define the mass market bourbon category. And they do some premium small batch, offerings as well. So definitely in the category for legacy distillery. I don't think there's any question about that. All right, next up on our list, Heaven Hill. And I got to say, I think Heaven Hill is considered a legacy distillery for a few solid reasons. I would say also they're really not, I don't want to say they're recognizable, but I don't think they're instantly recognizable. Not like Jack Daniels or Jim Beam or Wild Turkey. But they definitely are known in the bourbon community. So casual drinkers might not know them, but if you're in the bourbon world at all, you know who Heaven Hill is. There's some product with their name on it, but most of their product comes with a different name for what they produce. They have a very long history. They were founded in 1935. So, we say nearing 100 years, 90 years old, and we're going, well, they haven't been around that long when we think about the other distilleries we've been talking about. But 90 years of continuous production, still rare in American whiskey. So they've been around since right after Prohibition. They started up, and they've been family owned and operated ever since. So those two things alone, 90 years, family owned and operated, under family ownership still, those are two very impressive things. They have a massive inventory. They have a good aging program. They control one of the largest inventories of aging bourbon in the world. I mean, they have over 1.9 million barrels. I will tell you, you'll see a lot of non-distilling producers. And what that means is, people who are bottling and labeling bourbon and selling it, but they're not making the bourbon. A lot of them that have something that's aged, let's just say 12 years or more, a lot of them would get their product from Heaven Hill. So that's how much they had. They could sell it to other people to be able to. Now that's kind of gone away and is going away because of the bourbon craze the last, 6-8 years. That's gotten, bottled and consumed or sold off or whatever. But I still think they have a very large amount. They have some very iconic brands in their portfolio. And again, these are Heaven Hill products, but they're under the names Elijah Craig. They're under the names Evan Williams, Henry McKenna, Larceny, Rittenhouse Rye, Old Fitzgerald. These are some great bourbons that are very well thought of in the bourbon community, and they're all under the brand of Heaven Hill. They have a commitment to traditional methods. They've been using, traditional sour mash process, column stills with open fermentation. These are time-tested techniques that many craft producers try to emulate. Many of their offerings are bottled in bond, showing a continued respect for that historical quality standards. They've been consistent. They have good value and quality, and they've been an industry influencer. I mean, Heaven Hill has trained and employed some of the industry's most respected distillers, like Parker Beam from the Beam family, Denny Potter. I mean, they really have. And I'd say their innovations, like helping define the modern small batch category with Elijah Craig, kind of helped shape what bourbon is today. I mean, I would really say that. So in short, I'd say, Heaven Hill is a legacy distillery because it has the time, scale, historical impact, product quality that define what legacy, really means. So let's move on to the next one. Okay. Maker's Mark is rounding out my big 7. So this is going to be my final one, as you heard up a little bit ago. Maker's Mark, it earns a spot as a legacy distillery for me because it has this kind of blend of historical importance, production consistency, and its unique place in bourbon culture. And I'm going to go over a little bit about why that is. It has deep roots in history of bourbon. Maker's Mark was officially founded in 1953, so it's the youngest of our distilleries. It was founded by Bill Samuels Sr., but the distillery itself sits on the grounds of a bourbon operation dating back to the early 1800s. It's now part of Beam Santori that owns Maker's Mark, and they own some other ones as well. But it's retained a strong commitment to its heritage and original, approach to making bourbon. It really has. It's a game changer in the wheated bourbons. Maker's Mark was the first modern bourbon to feature a wheated mash bill, corn, wheat, and malted barley with no rye, as you heard me talk about earlier. This makes for a softer, sweeter profile, and it really helped define that category, paving the way for brands like W.L. Weller and Pappy Van Winkle. And if you know bourbon, you know how expensive those things are. And I got to tell you, I've done a few blind tastings with Antique 107, which is, part of that Weller lineup, because it's at 107 proof versus the cast strength from Maker's Mark. I've done it a handful of times, 4 or 5 times, and Maker's Mark has won every single time. I mean, they really make a fantastic product. So a little tip to you, if you're chasing the Weller brands and you haven't tried a cast strength from Maker's Mark, you like that weeded profile, go try it. I think you'll be surprised. I really do. They've got iconic branding. I think everybody has seen the branding. If I had to think about the 2 distilleries that have some of the best branding, it would definitely be Maker's Mark, and then it would be Woodford Reserve. Also does a great job with branding. I mean, you're talking about, Woodford Reserve. They're tied into the Kentucky Derby. They're going to get some recognition, some notoriety. So didn't make my list, but as far as branding, I think Woodford and Maker's Mark do a great job. They really do. Maker's Mark, they had one of the first premium bourbon brands to stand out on shelves in the post-Prohibition era. I mean, after Prohibition, their brand of bourbon, in the 1950s when it came out, it really stood out, and if you think about how it's bottled, the label, it looks pretty cool. I don't think back then they do the wax that they do now, where you dip it in wax, but they really had a good looking bottle. And they've had some very consistent products, but they've had some, generational kind of craftsmanship that's went into that. The Samuels family stayed involved in production for decades. That kind of helped in maintaining a consistent flavor profile. Their focus on quality over volume, they're not a huge distillery, but that focus on quality over volume led to international small batch practices, even before small batch, kind of was this buzzword, if you will. So they've been a really good model of consistency. They haven't tried to chase trends. They've done their own things. They produce one core product, plus a few, like I talked about earlier, a few kind of extensions of that, like Maker's 46. And I love their private select barrel program. Of picking a barrel in Kentucky, it's one of my favorite places to pick a barrel at because it's just an amazing experience. It's a science project. It is so much fun to be able to do. It really is. So Maker's Mark, if you ever go to Kentucky, definitely needs to be on your list of places to visit. The grounds, the property, just beautiful. Got some really cool rick houses with the bourbons in there. They take you on this tour. And, just the whole experience, they show you a really good time. I would definitely say if you go to Kentucky, you definitely need to visit Maker's Mark. And, Maker's Mark has had this cultural and industry influence as well. It's one of the few bourbons that managed to break into the cocktail and fine dining world long before the modern, bourbon boom. Maker's is often seen as a gateway bourbon. It's that 90 proofer. It's easy to drink. It's that wheated profile, so it's got a little softness to it, a little sweeter. And, it a lot of times has become the first love for whiskey drinkers who later explore deeper into the category of bourbon, right? So bottom line, Maker's Mark is a legacy distillery, in my opinion, no doubt about it. Not just because it makes the most diverse or oldest whiskey, but because it pioneered a new standard for quality, branding, and flavor that helped legitimize bourbon as a premium spirit. It really did. So that's our final legacy distillery. Now you might be going, okay, Rob, what's the deal here? Why are you, telling me this is where I should be drinking? Because this is where you get quality, you get value, you get consistency. When you talk about distilleries like the Big Seven, there is sometimes, there'll be this question, you might be asking it now, the craft dilemma, Why not drink a craft distillery, or why not support that? Well, I'm going to give you a few reasons why. And I'm not saying this is a blanket statement applies to every single craft distillery. I'm just telling you, as a general rule, you should be drinking from the Big Seven more than a craft distillery. Now, are there some craft distilleries you should drink from and want to support for whatever reason? Absolutely. There are reasons to do that. And I'll also give you a couple that I think do a really good job. But let's talk about the craft dilemma. Why can't craft distilleries compete? Why is it hard for them? Well, first of all, they're bottling very young whiskey, and most of the time charging, a premium cost for it. The overuse of small barrels, the price creep with less heritage and quality, marketing over mastery. And, when I can buy a bottle from Heaven Hill, let's just say for $40, and it crushes a $75 bottle from a craft distillery, I mean, I'll walk away sometimes going, what the hell did I just do? Why did I buy that? I mean, I sucker, put that on my forehead. I just got taken. And I'm not trying to knock the small distilleries. It's just hard for them to compete with these legacy distilleries. It just really is. Now, I do want to give you a couple of standouts that I really like. And the first one that comes to mind is a Texas distillery, believe it or not. And that's going to be Still Austin. I think Still Austin here in Texas is doing it right. Does a great job. They're really looking at quality. They've built up slowly. They're worth supporting. Now, are they a legacy distillery? No. But if I'm going to buy a craft bottle, it's going to be from someone like Still Austin. Another one I would give you is Redwood Empire. I think they do a great job. I want to say, I know they're in the Northwest. I'm trying to remember. I think it's Washington, could be Northern Oregon, but somewhere in that area. Redwood Empire, it's been around a few years now. And I think another example of doing it right, where they put out some quality products and quality is the focus. They're not rushing to get things out just for the sake of trying to turn a buck. They're really, I think, in it for the long haul, trying to make sure that they produce products that are quality so that the consumer enjoys it and hopefully comes back and buys another bottle of either that or something else that they offer. So there's two examples of, craft distilleries that I think are, can be considered exceptions. There's a couple others, but for the most part, they might have a couple of bourbons that are, worth buying. They don't have the portfolio that you're going to get from, and there can be some other reasons that you want to support, craft distilleries. Maybe you have a relationship with them, meaning a personal relationship. Maybe you held an event there and they struck a chord with you. I'm not saying don't support them. I'm just saying in the big picture, it's hard to compete with the legacy distilleries, the big seven that I mentioned. It just really is. All right, well, we're going to get ready to wrap up this episode. I would love to hear from you all. Send me an email, hit me up on social media. Love to know what's your favorite legacy bottle. And also, are there any craft brands that you think buck the trend? Is there anything that you think, hold on a second, this craft brand is outstanding, good value, quality product? I'd love to hear. Maybe I'm missing something, and I'd love to try it if I am. Okay, in closing, let me give you a few bottles from these big seven legacy distilleries I think you should have in your collection, or if you're getting into bourbon, that you should, start to build your collection with. And I'm going to talk, let's talk Wild Turkey. I'm going to give you two. Wild Turkey 101. I mean, it's a classic. You need to have that in your collection. I'm actually going to give you more than two. Rare breed at that high proof, 116.8 needs to be in there. Then I think you need to jump over and try a couple of Russell's product because they have that line as well. I think, do the Russell's 6-year-old rye, which is fantastic. You can also do the Russell's 10-year 90 proof. And then you got a Russell's single barrel at 110 proof. I gave you like 5 or 6. It just shows you how wide of a portfolio, how big a portfolio a Wild Turkey has. If I'm going to go to after that, if I'm going to go to Old Forester, I would say, 1910. This is that double barreled bottle, so double oaked, if you will. It's 93 proof. It's a great flavor on this bourbon. I think 1920 at 115 proof. I think their rye at 100 proof is a fantastic rye to start to get into rye. It's great for cocktails. So there's a few from them. Jack Daniels, I think the single barrel proof is absolutely fantastic. I think Jack Daniels you can get into if you can find a one of their bonded series is very good. I do also think that you need to get into their single barrel collection. They have a single barrel that's at 100 proof. They have a single barrel select. They have a single barrel at barrel proof, and they also have a single barrel rye. So, I mean, there's a lot to choose from Jack Daniels. The next one up on our list would be, from Four Roses. And again, finding, as you heard me talk about earlier in the episode when I talked about Four Roses, finding any of those specific recipe batches that are coming out. I think right now it's OESK, OBSK, OESF, and OBSF. But in addition to that, if you go to their their small batch select, it's got 6 recipes in it. It's about $45-$50. Just a fantastic bottle. Jim Beam would be the next one. I would say from Jim Beam, you definitely have to try Knob Creek. I mean, the whole Knob Creek lineup, you got the 9-year at 100 proof for like $30, $28. And then you've got Knob Creek 12-year. You've got Knob Creek 9-year at 120 proof. You've got, the whole lineup of Knob Creek, you definitely need to try. I do like the Baker 7. Now, I will say the Baker 7, it represents 7 years. I would say you would want to go, look at the neck label on there. I have had way more success, and not so much with the 7-year, but way more success when it's 8 years or older. It's fantastic. So Jim Beam has some great bottles as well. Heaven Hill, Elijah Craig, 94 proof, easy drinker, nice small batch bourbon, about $29. So it's great there. You also have Henry McKenna in their lineup. That's a single barrel. You have the bottled and bond that comes from them. And I would say you also have, I said bottled and bond a minute ago. I meant to say Heaven Hill bottled and bond, but you also have what's the other one I like from the Larceny lineup, where you can get the wheated small batch and the wheated barrel proof. So they're the other ones that make a wheated product. And by the way, the Rittenhouse Rye from them is a bottled and bond product, which is fantastic. Old Fitzgerald would be a premium. Not sure you're going to find that, but a good product nonetheless. And then one of my favorites from them for a rye is the Pikesville Rye. Just a fantastic bottle. Again, one of my favorites. Should be able to find it usually around $40 to $50. And then Maker's Mark, if I was going to give you some suggestions there, it would be just their entry-level bourbon. Try that first, 90 proofer. It would be getting a barrel select from somebody. Look at the recipe, because I told you it's a science project. They create these bourbons with different staves, flavored staves that create this cool profile. I say it's a bourbon. It would be a American whiskey after that. Once it's finished, it's no longer a bourbon. Another episode. And then I would say, one of my favorites, you could do the 46, that's fine. But my big recommendation from Maker's Mark would be their cask strength. Their Maker's Mark cask strength offering is absolutely fantastic. You heard me talk about how it beats Weller 107 for me every single time. It really does. So those would be a few that I would say. I would also say, budget buys, the ones I mentioned are definitely budget buys, but all of these distilleries also have some premium picks that you can go through and find from them. Everybody's gotten into that game of, making and creating these allocation bottles, these special releases. So, go through each one of these, look at what they offer. If you run into one, you might want to pick it up, but they do have some premium picks as well. So my final word would be, just tradition, longevity, this knowledge of the process. That's what endures, and that's why these big 7 distilleries are what I call legacy distilleries, because they have that. They have the track record, they have the history, they have the consistency, the quality in their products. And so that's my big 7. That's my take on why you should be drinking with the portfolios they have. You'd never have to drink or look for anything else, and you're going to get bang for your buck for quality products. That's our show for today, everybody. I appreciate you guys listening. Go have a sip of bourbon, and we'll see you guys on the next one.